And now for some other top stories from around the world. Tech giant Google has announced a $5.8 million commitment to accelerate AI skilling initiatives across sub-Saharan Africa. According to Google, this investment will support organizations working to empower people across Africa with the skills they need to thrive in an AI-powered world. Google said it aims to foster a deeper understanding of AI across society, ensuring everyone can participate in and benefit from this tech revolution. In Nigeria, the Senate on Wednesday screened and confirmed the appointment of the 7 ministerial nominees sent by the President Bola Tinubu administration last week. The screening of the nominees was done at the Committee of the House, while their appointments were confirmed at plenary. The ministerial nominees and their ministers are Dr. Nentawa Yilwada, the Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Reduction Minister, Muhammadu Dingyadi, Labour and Employment, Bianca Odemogu Ojukwu, Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, and Dr. Jumoke Oduwole for Industry, Trade and Investment. In Nigeria, the government has declared that the Presidential Compressed Natural Gas Initiative has already attracted over $75 million in private investments, in addition to government financing in the energy sector. Special Advisor to the President on Energy, Mrs. Oludamilare, disclosed this in Lagos, the country's commercial capital, at the just concluded Oil Trading and Logistics Africa Downstream Week. Verheijen, who was represented by Eriye Onogorua, her technical advisor on energy, said the investment aligns with the government's agenda to promote sustainable practices and reduce carbon emissions. Now, a health report out of the 12 nations with the poorest healthcare systems in the world, Nigeria comes in at number 11. According to a recent analysis published by the Legatum Prosperity Index, which evaluates nations globally, Nigeria is among those with some of the world's worst healthcare systems. According to the research, Nigeria is closely behind the Central African Republic, South Sudan, and Chad as the nations with the most difficult access to infrastructure for healthcare because of systemic challenges. Now, some good news in the private sector. In its unaudited Q3 2024 results, TransCorp plc reported a remarkable 352% year-on-year increase in profit before tax to 34.56 billion naira. Due to this impressive quarterly performance, the 9-month profit before tax increased by 303% year-on-year to 105.4 billion naira, which is already 79% more than the company's full year 2023 pre-tax profit. Furthermore, Transcorp's revenue increased by 166% from 45.9 billion in Q3 last year to 122.3 billion in Q3 of this year, 2024. Revenue also increased 133% year-over-year to 297.664 billion for the 9-month period. According to a local purchasing managers index survey, South African manufacturing activity increased in October for the second consecutive month. This is the first time the extremely volatile industry has seen 2 months of expansion since early 2023. Although it remained above the 50-point threshold that distinguishes expansion from contraction, the seasonally adjusted PMI, which was sponsored by the South African bank ABSA, dropped from a revised 53.3 points in September to 52.6 points in October. According to the chairman of Global Investment Bank UBS, Sergio Emotti, he said the results of the next elections in the world's largest economy will have an impact on international markets regardless of who wins the presidency. He said, and we quote, "The outlook for the fourth quarter is clearly still somehow influenced by the uncertainties we see on the macroeconomic and geopolitical front. We have the upcoming US elections, which of course is not going to be an uneventful event." We also think so. Well, as the Swiss bank's third quarter profit print came in below expectations, time will tell whether the US elections will actually impact the sentiment amongst banks around the world. And finally, in the most recent indication of the difficulties in producing clean energy, Abu Dhabi's primary renewable energy business has delayed its goal for green hydrogen capacity past 2030. According to the hydrogen company, the company's unit would still instead attain a capacity of just 1 million tons annually within the next 10 years. However, the office did not provide an explanation for the delay in the objective, Projects both domestically and abroad are part of the strategy. Well, we'll scoot over to Asia now. Although there's still concerns of fragmentation, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, has continued to prosper economically as a result of growing geopolitical tensions between the US and China, according to the IMF. Now, the UN body, the IMF, sorry, I beg your pardon, claims that the region has long profited from decades of globalization, establishing close commercial ties with the two biggest economies in the world, China and the US. Well, that's it for our top stories from around the world. When we return, I'll be joined by Oludamilare Adesola to review some of our top stories in more detail. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Business Week here on Arise News. I'm joined now by Oludamilare Adesola, Associate Director, Control Risk, to review some of our top stories in more detail. Welcome to the show, Damilare. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted us to start with the health story, healthcare. Tell us about this report. And this doesn't feel like news to a lot of us, but why is it still significant to mention this?
I think it's significant because, so for two reasons, the story is actually quite embarrassing.
What's the story?
So the story is that Nigeria ranks 11th out of 12 worst countries for healthcare in the world.
Okay.
And it's particularly embarrassing. I mean, we are on lots of many bottom lists. So this isn't the first, but it's particularly embarrassing when you look at the other countries that we have been lumped with, and countries who are ridden with civil war, who are LDCs, who have a lot of economic challenges, and Nigeria is sort of in this bucket. And I think it's something that it just takes a step back. We know the issues with healthcare, it's not news, but I think just seeing how we stand amongst even our counterparts in Africa, knowing that, you know, the Kenyas and the Ghanas are way ahead of us, even despite us being a larger economy. I think that's something that is essential for us to think about. And I think we talk about the conversation about infrastructure and access and how those are the fundamental issues with healthcare, but I think another layer to just add to that is the conversation about the accountability within the system.
Okay.
I know that this year there have been a few stories that made the news of negligence from doctors that led to injury or death of patients. And I think that more and more of those stories actually happen that don't make the news. And there's not a system. In other countries, you'll be sued or your license will be revoked.
But I have to ask you, Nigeria actually has good doctors.
Yes.
It must be said.
Yes.
And not just good doctors overseas. We have brilliant doctors in Nigeria. And my perspective has always been, you can have brilliant doctors, but in the absence of great infrastructure, you know, there is a potential challenge. And we see that there's a lot of effort to boost healthcare, to invest in healthcare. There's health tech. There's a lot of innovation coming into healthcare. So where is the disconnect, you think?
I think the disconnect is in the concentration. So I
when you say concentration, what do you mean?
So in where these skilled doctors are.
Okay.
So because obviously everyone is chasing financial opportunities, they have, you know, bills to pay, and so they're looking to go into the urban centers to work in the Lagos or to work in the big hospitals. And so what then happens is the PHCs and some of the primary health care centers and some of the more rural areas, not even necessarily rural, just some states that are not quite urbanized as some others, you don't have those skilled doctors there.
Yeah.
And so if you look at the concentration of skilled doctors, you see that it's concentrated in Lagos, it's concentrated in the West, it's concentrated in the urban centers, even in the North as well, looking at the Kadunas and the Kanos.
Yeah.
And then everywhere else pretty much has.
Yeah, and it must be said, you know, this survey was on healthcare infrastructure, not the skills of the staff. I mean, I haven't read the detail. And I always say that I see those as kind of two separate things. Because obviously qualified doctors are going abroad. They have to be qualified to go abroad. So, you know, I've always said human capital from a health and medical perspective has always been strong. And what about the funding
just the point
side?
That even that it's a class. This is a specific class that is emigrating. That is Japan.
The highly educated.
Yeah, the highly educated.
Skilled.
So that already even just shows you again that concentration conversation. They are not an accurate, in my opinion, an accurate depiction of what the skills in medical looks like.
Okay, that's interesting. And so would it be a funding issue? Would it just be a remodeling of the healthcare infrastructure, looking at the model of how we deliver healthcare? What will be the main catalyst to change this narrative?
Yeah. So the first thing that you've mentioned is infrastructure. And I think that a lot of, so while the government is doing direct investments, I think just even having a suitable, favorable business environment for the hospitals. And so now you see that even with that, the introduction of insurance has helped with access, and then hospitals have traffic through the doors, and so they can invest. And so even trickling this down, because again, it's a class issue, trickling this down with the NHIS and some other programs that could also help, the bottom of the pyramid to access this, and then those hospitals can then be equipped. And so it's a sort of a cycle of sorts where it's the infrastructure, the hospitals, it has, because it's as much as it's a social enterprise, it needs to be a profitable enterprise at the same time. And so just reaching that balance as well. And then obviously some of the restrictions, because we're not manufacturing. Pharmaceuticals has helped when it comes to medicine, and we don't have too many challenges as we did 10, 15 years ago. But there's still a challenge because there's no manufacturing of medical equipment here. And so that, again, it's a broader conversation about favorable systems for manufacturing, for electricity, reducing the cost of operations, and so that a business that is operating in this sector I can assemble, even if I don't fully manufacture, I can assemble parts, and then it helps to reduce my costs.
Yeah, interesting. There's a whole lot of work to do in the healthcare space. Now, Nigeria declared that the Presidential Compressed Natural Gas Initiative has attracted already $75 million, which for gas sounds like, in a sense, just a drop in the ocean. Why is this so significant?
I think it's significant because gas doesn't get as much attention as it should compared to oil. I mean, we talk about oil and gas, but it's really oil that is driving the sector and a lot of the investment that we've been seeing in the past. And so I'm not sure, because I saw different versions of the story, whether it was attracted investment or that the federal government itself had committed this investment.
Yeah, so it's a combination of both private sector investment as well as government financing, government support.
Yeah, so I think that it will help to drive, because there's a lot of potential, and Nigeria is one of the largest gas producers and has one of the largest gas reserves in the country. But despite this, we're still producing, about 4% of our reserves. We've just tapped into about 4%, and so there's a lot of potential there, especially in the midstream, but also the upstream as well. And talking about conversations about transportation, I know the president's statement wasn't well received when he talked about 1,000 liters for petrol compared to 200 for gas. But that's actually the truth. It's a cheaper alternative. And so that rollout's being prioritized by the government, because if I say, okay, it's a cheaper alternative, where do I get gas to fill my tank? It's not widely available. And so that investment is key just to transform a lot of different sectors.
So I want to get your view on the ministerial confirmations. Obviously, the ministers were announced the previous week, but they were confirmed this week. So your take on how this is going to drive policy in those spaces and efficiency?
Yes. So I would start first by saying that I'm in the Tinubu administration, we've seen a lot of synergy between the legislature and the executive, which is good. I mean, in previous administrations, they'll take time, they'll take, a long time before they approve, or they may even reject at the end of the day. And so I think that's just because of the majority seats are being held by the APC. So that is still commendable for policy progress. But at the same time, I feel that I found the whole, because there was a lot of buzz around reshuffling and appointing new ministers, it was quite underwhelming at the end of the day. A lot of the key portfolios, first of all, is even a presumption that the issue is mismatched portfolios. So the reshuffling is like, okay, this person is good, but he's not good here. And it's like, okay, maybe he shouldn't even be a minister in the first place. But that's a separate conversation. And I think that some of the key offices, some of the key portfolios, agriculture, looking at petroleum, looking at how the implications obviously fuel, even the CBN should have been thrown in there for review. And I think a lot of the different offices that are affecting what we are seeing, the socioeconomic conditions, they were overlooked, and they didn't do any sort of reshuffling or introducing new people into the system. And so I don't have too much faith in what the implication would be. On one hand, I know that I'm a fan of Jumoke Oduwole, and I do think that her being in that seat would be profitable. But at the same time, the Ministry of Industry is limited in what it can actually achieve. So if you look at the scorecard for her predecessor, one of the things that were flagged against her was that there was a lot of exit from the market from international companies. But to what extent can she control that? If you ask them, it was Forex issues that drove them away. Nigeria's had security challenges, people still stayed. Nigeria's had private consumption challenges, people still stay. But this was the straw. And to what extent is that in the control of the Minister of Industry? So I think just having a broader view, and that's what the Ministry of Economy is supposed to do. But it's a little bit underwhelming.
Okay, well, I mean, speaking of the Minister of Economy, I guess one would like to see that with the injection of new energy, fresh blood in a sense, that coordinatory role of coordination will be felt in a more impactful way. But we have one more story, because we have to go in the interest of U.S. elections. You saw the jobs figures. You've seen all the hula baloo Tuesdays upon us. You know, how is all these economic challenges, do you think, going to influence? I wouldn't say economic challenges. It was really the jobs report, because the U.S. economy has been relatively stable. But what are your thoughts?
I think for us here, the key things that we're looking out for is obviously there's going to be a new president regardless, but what we're interested in is the trade policies, the foreign policies, and then geopolitics, because you know that Trump on one hand is having an America First agenda, and so whether the president will continue to insert themselves wherever the president insert themselves in international affairs in the Middle East and some of these regions where the U.S. has been on soil. So that is going to be fundamental to global markets, where they're looking at the various supply chains and how that affects us here in Africa.
And what about in terms of just the general geopolitics around the Middle East? Do you have any thoughts on what the approach might be? You talked about America First. I know he's kind of had this kind of policy of non-interference in a way, and supporting the sovereignty of those nations. But what do you see, a Trump presidency might have if he ends up in the office?
I think maybe just looking back at what he did previously, I think it would be muted. It wouldn't be something that would be top of his agenda. So that on one hand, it could mean that the status quo would remain, where whoever is, the chief of army would continue to do his thing. And then on the other hand, where there are some controversial issues like Gaza and Israel, he might step in and be like, okay, you know what, this is, let's move away, or let's, align ourselves. The Conservative Party is predominantly Christian, and so they also have those values, and so it's hard to say at this point. I think that he would start off by just letting it run in autopilot, and then when there are key controversial issues or that come up, he would insert himself.
Yeah, so I also hear you saying Africa shouldn't expect too much, really, in that case, in that scenario.
Yeah.
I mean, the Kamala scenario is something also that we're monitoring closely. But any thoughts briefly on what a Kamala presidency would drive?
Yeah, I think for Africa the USAID and some of these initiatives that the U.S. government has, giving aid or even just funding to African countries, it would thrive more under her presidency, where different countries would prioritize. Diplomatic relations will be a thing. She will come to different African countries while she's in tenure, if she comes into power, and so that would be fundamental for us, because that relationship is very key for a lot of things in different African countries. Not all, some other countries have more. This is an opportunity for China, for example, to step in and fill some of those funding gaps. But at the same time, even looking at Europe and some of the other relationships that we have. So it would be bad in the short term, but it will then mean that other people, other powers, can step in and to fill that role. That
I still want to talk about Google and Tech AI quickly. They're investing $5.8 million, which seems small, because they announced it for Africa, not for Nigeria. Yeah. But it's a good start, right?
It's a good start, and the hope is that this will be a trickle effect and get the attention of some other big players in the space. The core thing is that if you look at global AI, the funds, Africa is only getting about 1% of it, and so this helps to just sort of kickstart that and prioritize it. They have relatively small numbers that they're targeting, a couple thousand, trained in schools, and, training government, having a policy campus of sorts to train governments about, how to safeguard, citizens against AI, and just teaching them about AI policy. So I think it's kickstarting, because we're at the brink of AI. We're yet to really see how, AI is just being democratized now with some of these platforms like ChatGPT. So prior to that, it was still something that was novel. And so as it becomes more and more commonplace and it's being incorporated in business, talent is, aligning to that, I think that it would then have a significant impact on what is prioritized, whether it's funding into Africa or governments themselves, what they are prioritizing in funding.
Absolutely. Interesting, I was at a Google event during the week with Matt Britting, who's the president for EMEA for Google, and one of the interesting developments he talked about is the localization of artificial intelligence apps and things, where, for instance, introduction of 15 Nigerian languages into some of their learning modules. So I thought that was really interesting. It's good to see how AI continues to evolve, even in Africa. Oludamilare, Adesola, thanks as always for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.